It was a rainy afternoon, and the storm that had disrupted the school retreat was still lingering. I had planned to surprise Trina by coming home early, but instead, I was about to be blindsided by the truth. My name is Matthew Cole, a high school biology teacher in Austin, Texas, and that day, I was about to lose everything I thought I knew about my life. The day I discovered that my wife, Trina, had been living a lie for years. I had walked through the door expecting a quiet evening with my family, but instead, I stood frozen in the hallway, hand still gripping the front door handle, listening to Trina's voice. It was one of those moments when time seems to slow down, and every word feels like a punch in the gut. Can you believe it? 12 years and he is completely clueless, she said, laughter dripping from her words. Matthew is the ultimate idiot. My heart sank, and I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do, where to go, or how to react. There I stood, caught in the open, unaware of what was happening right under my nose. She didn't realize I was home. Her laughter was almost mocking, a bitter, cruel sound that seemed to echo in the silence around me. She continued, completely unaware of my presence. Eric wants me to tell him soon. He thinks it's time the kids knew who their real father is. Trina laughed again, clearly entertained by the deception that had consumed my life for over a decade. I had no idea who Eric was, but I knew I was about to find out. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady myself. I couldn't process what I was hearing. Trina, my wife of 12 years, was laughing about me, about the life we had built together, about the family I thought I was raising. Sophie and Tyler, my kids, had always been my pride and joy. I coached Tyler's little league team, helped Sophie with her science projects every weekend, and truly believed that the bond we shared was real. But here was the truth, unraveling in front of me like a cruel joke. I had always assumed that my children had my eyes, my stubbornness, my hands, traits that felt so real, so undeniable. Yet now, with every word Trina spoke, I could feel the ground slipping away beneath me. I was a fool, a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. She went on, unaware of the devastation she was causing. The best part, she said, is how proud he gets when people say, Tyler looks just like him, like father, like son. If only he knew. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, but when I finally moved, I did so silently, dropping my keys onto the table without making a sound. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I needed to get out, to think, to breathe. I backed toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest, but Trina was so absorbed in her own amusement that she didn't hear the panic growing inside me. As I stepped outside, I felt the cool raindrops hit my face, but they couldn't wash away the weight of what I had just learned. Trina had betrayed me, and now I was left to pick up the shattered pieces of my life. For a moment, I thought about confronting her, demanding the truth, but I knew that would be a mistake. No, this was not about confronting her right now. This was about justice. I would not be the fool anymore. Sitting in my truck, I stared at the rain streaking down the windshield, my mind spinning. How long had this been going on? How many lies had I swallowed? The house we had built together, the children I had raised, none of it was real. But I couldn't change what had happened. All I could do now was fight back. I made a decision that night. I was going to expose the truth, and in the process, I was going to take back everything that had been stolen from me. I would no longer be the fool. I didn't know yet how I was going to do it, but one thing was clear. Trina had underestimated me, and that mistake was going to cost her everything. As I sat in the truck, the rain falling heavily outside, I couldn't help but replay every memory, every moment from the last 12 years, through a new lens. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my family was now in question. It felt like someone had pulled the rug out from under me, and I was left tumbling into a pit of confusion and disbelief. How had I been so blind? How could I have missed the signs? Trina and I met at a teachers' conference in Dallas 15 years ago. She was a substitute teacher at the time, charming and beautiful, with a laugh that made everyone in the room turn to look. I was 28, fresh out of graduate school, and instantly smitten. She seemed perfect in every way. We dated for 3 years, and when Sophie was born, I felt like my life had found its purpose. I wanted to be the father I never had. My own father worked construction, always gone, never around to be there for me. I vowed to be present for everything, every school play, every soccer game, every scraped knee. When Tyler was born, 2 years later, I thought everything was complete, but now, as I sat there in the truck, I felt like I had been living in a lie. Trina had always seemed so perfect, so supportive. But as I thought back, things started to unravel. There had always been little inconsistencies, little things that didn't quite add up, but I had pushed them aside. How many times had she insisted on handling the kids' doctor appointments alone? Why was she so adamant that I wasn't needed in the delivery room for Tyler? She told me it was too personal, and that she needed space. I had respected that at the time, but now it felt like a carefully crafted lie. There were the weekend trips she took with the kids to visit her sister in San Antonio. She always came back with no photos, no stories, as if nothing had happened. When I asked about them, she would brush me off, saying the kids were too busy having fun to remember anything. I had never questioned it. I just assumed she was being a good mom, taking the kids to visit family. But now I realized that those trips were just another part of her double life, a life where I wasn't included. Then there was Eric Sloan. I had always trusted Trina's judgment when it came to hiring contractors for our home. Eric had worked on our house 3 years ago, and Trina had insisted on hiring him, even though his bid was higher than the others. She said she trusted him more than the others. I had no reason to doubt her. But looking back, I remember how Trina always seemed to find reasons to be outside when Eric was working. She would bring him iced tea, chat with him while he worked, and always made sure to spend extra time with him. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it was all starting to make sense in the worst possible way. Tyler was 8, which meant Eric had been working on our house around the time Tyler was born. Sophie was 10, which meant that her conception came even earlier. The timeline of everything was starting to click together, piece by piece, like a jigsaw puzzle revealing a picture I didn't want to see. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but more than that, I felt something worse. Betrayal. Trina had been living this double life, and I had been completely oblivious. I had trusted her with everything. I had built a life with her, a family, and she had torn it all apart. I thought about the kids, Sophie and Tyler. I had always been so proud of them, so convinced that they were mine in every sense. I had coached Tyler's little league team. Sophie and I had spent countless hours together, working on science projects. They called me Dad, and I had always thought that bond was unbreakable. But now I was questioning everything. Were they really my kids? Or had I been raising someone else's children, completely unaware of the truth? The irony of it all was overwhelming. I was a biology teacher. I taught my students about genetics, about heredity, about how traits are passed down from parents to children. Yet I had been blind to the most important inheritance of all, my own family. How had I missed the signs? How had I been so willing to accept everything at face value without questioning it? I stared out the windshield, watching the rain blur the world outside, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. The life I had built, the family I had raised, had all been built on a lie. And I didn't know how to pick up the pieces. But one thing I knew for sure: I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't going to let her get away with it. Trina had made a critical mistake. She had underestimated me, and I was about to make her pay for it. I couldn't do anything about the past, but I could control what happened next. I was going to fight for my family, for the truth, and for justice. I just had to be smart. I had to plan carefully, because if I rushed in blind, I would lose everything, and I wasn't about to lose any more. As the days passed, I couldn't shake the image of Trina's voice echoing in my mind. Matthew is the ultimate idiot. Those words played on repeat, each time cutting deeper than the last. I had always prided myself on being a dedicated husband and father, but now I realized I had been living a lie so intricately woven into the fabric of my daily life that I never even saw it. In the hours I spent in my truck that night, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in ways that made my stomach churn. The signs had been there all along, but I had never questioned them. Trina's weekend trips with the kids, the constant secrecy surrounding their doctor appointments, the way she had always insisted on handling the finances herself. It all pointed to something I was too blind to see. I couldn't stop thinking about Eric. I had heard his name before, but never thought much of it. He was just a contractor, someone Trina trusted to work on our house. But the more I thought about him, the more I began to suspect that he was something far more dangerous than just a contractor. He had been in our lives for years, even before Tyler was born. The timeline was too perfect. Trina had insisted that we hire him for the renovations 3 years ago, and that was around the time that Tyler was born. Sophie, however, had come along 2 years earlier. That meant Eric had been in her life from the very beginning. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Trina had been living a double life, and I had been none the wiser. Eric wasn't just a contractor. He was the man she had been seeing behind my back for years. And all the while, I had been playing the role of the unsuspecting husband, blind to the betrayal right under my nose. I began to piece together their affair. Trina had always been so secretive about certain things. How she insisted on handling the kids' doctor appointments alone. How she had kept their birth certificates and social security cards locked away in a filing cabinet I never had access to. I never questioned it. She was the mother of my children. I trusted her completely. But now I realized that was part of the act. She had kept these things hidden to control the narrative, to protect her secret life with Eric. Then there was the money. I had always trusted Trina to handle our finances, but something didn't feel right. I had always felt like there was more money missing than I could account for, but I had never dug into it. I had a vague sense of unease, but I never acted on it. Now, I realized how foolish I had been. Trina had been siphoning money from our accounts for years, funneling it into a joint account with Eric. She had been using our money to fund her affair, to build a life with him, all while I worked my ass off as a teacher to provide for the family. The more I thought about everything, the more disgusted I became. The kids, Sophie and Tyler. They had always been my pride and joy, but now I was questioning whether they were even mine. The paternity tests would tell me the truth, but I knew what I would find. I knew it in my gut. Trina and Eric had been planning this for years, and I had been the fool who had been left in the dark. I started to research everything I could about paternity testing, divorce lawyers, child custody laws in Texas. I needed to know how to protect myself, how to protect the kids, and how to fight back against Trina's lies. This wasn't just about anger anymore. This was about taking control of my life, my family, and my future. I hired a private investigator, Janet Morris, a former police detective who specialized in adultery cases. She was tough, no nonsense, and exactly what I needed. I needed to know the full extent of Trina and Eric's deception, and Janet was the one who could dig up the dirt. The first time I met her, I told her I wanted to know everything. How long had this affair been going on? Where did they meet? What were they doing? I had to know it all. Janet didn't mince words. "This is going to hurt," she warned me. "Are you sure you want to know the extent of it?" I thought about Trina's laughter, her cruelty as she mocked me. I thought about how she had destroyed everything I had worked so hard for, how she had taken my trust and shattered it into a million pieces. "I'm sure," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. The investigation began immediately. I started gathering evidence, documents, photographs, credit card receipts, hotel records, all the things I needed to build my case. I wasn't going to confront Trina yet. I knew better than that. Confrontation would only give her the chance to twist the story and turn it around on me. No, this was going to be a calculated, methodical plan. I would get everything in order, and when the time came, I would strike. In the meantime, I had to keep up appearances. I had to be the loving husband and father while I built my case. I coached Tyler's little league team, helped Sophie with her schoolwork, and acted like nothing was wrong. But inside, everything was falling apart. Every day, I felt like I was wearing a mask, pretending to be something I was no longer sure I was. The hardest part was the uncertainty. What if the kids weren't mine? What if everything I had believed for the past 12 years was a lie? But I had no choice but to move forward. The truth had to come out. I had to protect the kids. They deserved better than to live a life built on deception. And so, I continued with my plan, gathering evidence, documenting everything, preparing for the battle that was to come. The paternity test results arrived, and the stark clinical language they carried hit me like a punch to the gut. There is zero probability that Matthew Cole is the biological father of either Sophie or Tyler. Even though I had been preparing myself for this outcome, knowing deep down that it was coming, the reality of seeing it in black and white was far worse than I had imagined. I had spent the last decade of my life believing I was raising my children, loving them, guiding them, teaching them, coaching them. But now, I was left questioning everything. I sat alone in my truck for what felt like hours, staring at the results, numb to everything around me. The world outside my windshield was a blur, just like my mind. The house, the kids, my marriage, my whole life. It all felt like a lie now. But there was something else, something I hadn't anticipated. As much as the truth of their paternity crushed me, there was a part of me that couldn't help but feel something else. These kids, Sophie and Tyler, had been my children for the past decade. I had raised them, loved them, and taken care of them. Their laughter, their hugs, their voices calling me Dad, none of that had been a lie to me, and in my heart, it still wasn't. I had given them everything. And even though biology may have not made me their father, the love I had shown them, the sacrifices I had made, the time I had spent with them, those things made me their father in every sense that mattered. In all the ways that truly count, I was their dad. But what would the future hold now? How could I continue being their father when the truth was so undeniable? How would I fight for them in a world that might see me as nothing more than a stranger, a man who had been deceived for years? The thought of losing them, of having them taken away by someone who had been hiding in the shadows for so long, was unbearable. Yet, despite the anger, the heartbreak, and the overwhelming sense of betrayal, I also knew that I had to do something about it. I couldn't just walk away, not after everything, not after being the father they had known and trusted. I thought back to the way Trina had reacted when I had found out. She had laughed, thinking I was a fool, thinking that I was too naive to see what was happening right under my nose. But now, the tables were turned. I wasn't the fool anymore, and I wasn't going to let her take everything away from me. I wasn't going to let her or Eric dictate the future of my family. No, I was going to fight for them. I would do whatever it took to keep them, to protect them from the lies that had been built around them. But first, I had to gather more information. I needed to know everything, every single detail of Trina and Eric's affair. I had already gathered paternity results, financial documents, and private investigator reports. But I needed more. I needed to prove that I had been the one who had truly been there for Sophie and Tyler. Through every scraped knee, every school play, every baseball game. In a way, the test results gave me something unexpected. Clarity. I knew the truth now, the biological truth. But the emotional truth, the truth of who I was to these kids, of the bond we had formed, was something no test could define. That was mine to claim. I began documenting everything. Photos, videos, school papers, receipts from Little League games, handwritten notes from Tyler about his day, pictures of Sophie's science projects, everything that showed I had been there for them, everything that proved I was their father, no matter what the test results said. And then it occurred to me. The fight wasn't going to be about biology. It was going to be about love, about who had been there for them, who had built the foundation of their lives, who had been their true father in every way that mattered. I started making a plan, a detailed strategy for everything I needed to do to protect them. I knew the courts would eventually need to make a decision, and I wanted to be ready. I was going to make sure that Sophie and Tyler had the future they deserved, free from the chaos that Trina and Eric had brought into their lives. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of determination, I wasn't just going to roll over. I wasn't going to be passive in this fight. I was going to do everything I could to make sure the truth came out, and that the children who had been raised under my roof, with my love, would remain mine. And so, I set everything into motion. The divorce proceedings, the custody fight, the financial fraud claims. It wasn't going to be easy. I knew it was going to be a long battle, but I was prepared. I had learned the truth, and now I was going to use it to win. I wouldn't let her win, not like this. The more I learned, the clearer my path became. The test results had shown me the biological truth, but it was the emotional reality of my life with Sophie and Tyler that kept me grounded. This wasn't about winning or losing a battle over paternity. It was about protecting a future that had been built on love and care, not just blood. I wasn't about to let Trina's betrayal take that away from me. I had spent 12 years of my life dedicated to these kids, and I was going to keep fighting for them, no matter what. But how to begin? What was the next step? I couldn't just rush in. I had to be strategic, methodical, and precise. My mind started working faster, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The evidence from the paternity tests was just the beginning. I needed to gather more. I needed a clear and irrefutable case, and most importantly, I needed to keep my cool and act with purpose. The first thing I did was meet with Catherine Walsh, a family lawyer known for handling tough cases. She came highly recommended, and she had the sharp mind I needed for this kind of battle. The meeting took place in a small coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where you could have a conversation without being overheard. Catherine was sharp, no nonsense, and immediately began asking all the right questions. She didn't sugarcoat anything, and that was exactly what I needed. "What's your end goal?" she asked after listening to the details of my situation. "What do you want to achieve?" "I want custody of my kids," I said, my voice steady. "I want them to stay with me." Her eyes narrowed as she processed the information. "That's what I thought. But you know it's not going to be easy. Paternity tests are just one piece of the puzzle. You'll have to prove that you've been the primary caregiver, that you've been the one who raised them. And the financial fraud, well, that could help your case, but it might also work against you if it seems like you're only doing this for the money." "I'm not doing this for the money," I said firmly. "I'm doing this for them. They've been my kids since the day they were born. Nothing changes that." Catherine nodded. "Good. Then let's make sure you have everything you need to prove that. We'll need documentation, pictures, videos, school records, anything that shows you've been there for them. We'll need affidavits from people who can testify to your role in their lives. And we'll need to track down every piece of evidence of Trina and Eric's deception. The more we have, the stronger your case will be." We spent hours discussing the legal aspects of the case. Catherine outlined a clear plan for what needed to be done: gathering evidence, preparing my testimony, filing for custody, and making sure everything was airtight. It was a lot to take in, but I was determined to see it through. This was my family, and I wasn't going to let anyone tear it apart. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I kept up the appearance of normalcy at home, making sure Trina didn't suspect anything. I coached Tyler's Little League games, helped Sophie with her science project, and did everything I could to maintain the routine. But behind the scenes, I was working tirelessly to build my case. I gathered everything I could find: Photos from birthdays, Christmases, school events, family outings, all the little moments that proved I had been an active and loving father. I started recording my interactions with the kids, documenting every moment that showed how deeply I was involved in their lives. I also reached out to teachers, coaches, and family friends who could testify to my role as their primary caregiver. I continued working with Janet, the private investigator. She had already uncovered some damning evidence, but I needed more. I needed to be certain that Trina and Eric's secret life was exposed fully, beyond a shadow of a doubt. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. It wasn't just the affair. It was the manipulation, the deceit, the years of betrayal. Trina had not only lied to me, she had lied to our children. She had been planning a future with Eric while I worked my ass off to support her and the kids, all while she played the role of the loving wife and mother. The more I saw, the clearer it became. I had been nothing but a pawn in her game. But the evidence was starting to add up. Janet had found hotel receipts, credit card statements, and even emails between Trina and Eric, all detailing their secret getaways, their plans for the future, and their discussions about how to handle the kids when the truth finally came out. The most damning piece of evidence was a recording Janet had made of Trina and Eric talking in a restaurant. They had been discussing their plans for moving in together and how they would tell the kids about who their real father was. The way they talked about me, it was as if I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a temporary fixture in their plans. I could hear Trina's voice in my mind, mocking me, laughing about how easy it had been to deceive me. "Matthew will probably want visitation," she had said, as if I were some afterthought in her life, someone who could easily be replaced. I had never felt more humiliated, more betrayed, but that feeling quickly transformed into something else, rage, and that rage gave me the strength to keep going. I had a plan now. A clear course of action. I would fight for my kids, not just for their custody, but for their future. I wasn't going to let Trina and Eric tear apart everything I had worked so hard to build. I wasn't going to let them take away the family I had raised, no matter what. The first step was filing for custody, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. Trina would fight back. She had already started to make her plans, and I had to be ready for whatever she threw my way. But with Catherine on my side, and the evidence I had gathered, I felt confident that I could win, and I wasn't going to stop until I did. The days following my decision to act were filled with a strange, suffocating tension. I had made the choice to fight for my kids, to expose the truth, and to take control of my life again. But on the surface, nothing had changed. To the outside world, I was still the same Matthew Cole, the high school biology teacher, the husband, the father. Every morning, I woke up early, just like I always had. I made breakfast for the kids, helped them with their schoolwork, and dropped them off at school, just like before. Trina and I exchanged pleasantries in the mornings, like everything was fine, and then she would leave for work. The calm, routine rhythm of daily life was the mask I wore to hide what was happening beneath the surface. On the outside, it was as if I was still the man I had always been, the husband who adored his wife, the father who doted on his children. But in reality, I was walking a tightrope, balancing between keeping up the illusion of normalcy and gathering the final pieces of the puzzle that would expose the life Trina had been living behind my back. It was exhausting. Every time I interacted with Trina, every time I looked into her eyes and smiled, pretending everything was fine, I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me. I had to keep up appearances, not just for her, but for the kids. They had no idea what was coming. They had no idea how their world was about to be torn apart. I couldn't let them see the cracks in the facade. I couldn't let them know that everything they thought they knew about their family was a lie. Sophie and Tyler still looked to me for guidance, for support, for love. I couldn't betray them by letting my anger and heartbreak show. No matter how hard it was, I had to be the stable figure in their lives until I could put the wheels in motion to protect them. The hardest part of maintaining this normal routine was pretending that I hadn't just spent hours at the lawyer's office, or that I wasn't anxiously waiting for the next round of evidence from Janet. There were days when I could barely concentrate on my teaching, when the weight of everything felt too heavy to carry. I would stand in front of my biology class, lecturing on genetics and inheritance, and all I could think about was how my own life was a twisted example of those very same principles. Traits passed down from parents to children. What about my own inheritance? The one I had been so blind to, but I couldn't let it slip. I couldn't let my students see the turmoil in my eyes. So, I forced myself to focus, to teach them about dominant and recessive genes, Punnett squares, and inheritance patterns. The irony was suffocating. I was teaching them the science of heredity, all the while knowing that my own family had been built on a lie that Trina had so carefully constructed for years. At home, I kept up the routine. I helped Sophie with her science projects. I coached Tyler's little league games, and I participated in family dinners. But every moment of normalcy felt like a struggle. I could see Trina's face as she smiled at me, thinking she had gotten away with everything. I knew the truth. I knew what she had done. But I couldn't show it yet. There were moments when I felt like I was drowning. Moments when I wanted to scream, to tell Trina everything I knew, to expose her lies right then and there. But I knew better than that. I had to be patient. I had to stay calm, stay focused. If I confronted her too soon, she would only turn it around on me, manipulate the situation to her advantage. I couldn't let that happen. Not this time. It was a delicate balance, pretending that nothing had changed while I prepared to take everything down. Every night, after the kids were in bed, I would retreat to my study and pore over the evidence that had been gathered. The paternity test results, the photos, the bank records, the private investigators' reports. It was all starting to come together. I could see the pattern, the lies, the manipulation. I had the evidence I needed to expose Trina for what she truly was, but I had to wait for the right moment. The kids were still oblivious to the storm brewing in our lives. Sophie was still excited about her upcoming science fair project, and Tyler was still practicing his baseball swings in the backyard. They had no idea that everything they knew was about to change. But I wasn't going to let Trina's lies take them from me. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. The calm exterior was slowly starting to crack, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. I had to stay in control, stay patient, and wait for the right moment to make my move. The longer I waited, the stronger my case would become. The more evidence I gathered, the clearer it was that Trina and Eric had underestimated me. They thought they could get away with it, but they hadn't counted on me being as determined as I was. For the time being, I would continue to play the role of the loving husband and father. I would continue to smile and nod, to ask about Trina's day, and listen to the kids talk about their school projects. But in the back of my mind, I was always planning, always preparing. I would expose the truth, and when I did, I would make sure I had everything I needed to win. I wasn't going to let them win, not after everything. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the situation only grew heavier. The longer I maintained this false sense of normalcy, the harder it became to keep up the facade. Every moment with Trina, every interaction with the kids, felt like a tightrope walk. I was a man holding a fragile, hidden truth, and every time I smiled, every time I asked about her day or made a joke, I felt like a fraud. But I wasn't just pretending for the sake of pretending. I was playing my part, gathering evidence, and preparing for the battle I knew was coming. This wasn't just a fight for custody. It was a fight for my dignity, for my children's future, and for the life that had been systematically taken from me. I had already hired a private investigator, Janet Morris, to help me. I needed to know everything, and Janet was an expert at digging deep. Her reputation as a former police detective who specialized in adultery cases made her exactly the person I needed. She wasted no time getting started, and the first few weeks of her investigation were filled with small but significant discoveries. Janet was meticulous. She gathered hotel receipts, credit card statements, and even found emails between Trina and Eric detailing their secret trips together, the dates they had met, and their plans to eventually tell the kids the truth. I was sickened by the content of these documents, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. This was the evidence I needed. Janet had already uncovered things I didn't even know I should be looking for. It was a slow, steady process, but I was getting closer to the truth with every passing day. One of the first big breakthroughs came when Janet discovered a series of text messages between Trina and Eric. The messages were dated months ago, and they detailed their plans to take the kids on a trip. The way they talked about making their life together a reality, and the way they referred to me as if I were just a bystander. It was gut-wrenching to read, but it confirmed everything I had suspected. The most damning evidence, however, came in the form of a recorded conversation between Trina and Eric at a restaurant. Janet had managed to get this recording covertly, and it was nothing short of devastating. In it, they discussed how they would break the news to the kids about who their real father was. It was as if I was some temporary inconvenience in their lives, someone who had served his purpose and would soon fade into the background. I could hear Eric's voice, dismissive and cold, saying, "Matthew will probably want visitation, but no court will give him custody. Blood is blood, and no matter what, I'll be their father." Listening to that recording felt like a punch to the gut. I had been nothing more than a pawn to them. All the years I had spent raising these kids, all the sacrifices I had made, none of it mattered to them. To Eric, I was just a placeholder, and to Trina, I was a fool she could manipulate. But the truth was now out in the open. I had the proof I needed. I remember sitting in my truck one evening, listening to the recording over and over again. Each time, it cut deeper, but with every listen, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. They had underestimated me for far too long. The evidence was now in my hands, and I had a plan to use it. The private investigator's work wasn't just about uncovering the affair. It was about proving the extent of the deception, the calculated manipulation that had gone on behind my back for years. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Trina's betrayal wasn't just about infidelity. It was about an entire life she had built with Eric while using me as a cover, pretending to be the perfect wife and mother to keep me in the dark. The financial evidence was just as damning. Janet had uncovered transfers from our joint account to Eric's personal account, payments for the secret trips Trina and Eric had taken, and even evidence that Trina had been siphoning money off to fund their relationship. The house they had bought together, the one I had unwittingly helped pay for, all of it came into focus. My hard-earned money, the money I had provided for our family, had been used to fund their life together. And all this time, I thought I was working for my family's future. I had been a fool. As the investigation progressed, I knew the next step was inevitable. I had to make my move. The evidence was piling up, and it was becoming impossible for Trina to deny what she had done. But I needed to be careful. I needed to make sure everything was in place before I confronted her. I had to make sure that when I went to court, I had an airtight case, and I couldn't afford any slip-ups. I continued to gather evidence, documenting every interaction with the kids, every little detail that proved my role in their lives. I needed to show the court that I had been more than just a father in name, that I had been their father in every sense of the word. I knew I had the love and the bond to prove it, but I also needed the facts, the paperwork, the records that would support my claim. The hardest part was the waiting. Every day I would go about my routine, pretending that nothing had changed, while the truth was slowly and methodically coming to light. But I couldn't wait forever. I had a plan, and I was ready to execute it. The time for pretending was over. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for justice. I was fighting for the life that Trina had stolen from me. And when the time came, I would make sure she couldn't run from the truth. The more I dug into the financial records, the sicker I became. At first, it had been little things, strange withdrawals, transfers I didn't remember authorizing, unexplained purchases, but soon it became a clear pattern. I had been so focused on my teaching, on providing for our family, that I never thought to scrutinize every penny. I trusted Trina to handle the finances. I trusted her because she had always seemed to have a firm grip on things. Now I realized that she had been manipulating me, playing me like a fool while siphoning money into accounts I never knew existed. I couldn't let it slide any longer. I had to confront the truth, even if it meant facing the darkest part of our relationship. I contacted Catherine Walsh, my attorney, and we began to break down the financial deception Trina had masterminded over the years. The first discovery was a joint bank account that Trina had opened with Eric. It had been active for over 7 years, and it was clear that much of our household income had been funneled into this account. Trina had been siphoning money into it steadily. Money that should have been going into our family's savings. Money that should have been used for the kids' future. Instead, it was being used to fund her affair. There were transfers for vacations, expensive dinners, and hotel stays. All of it hidden from me. All of it masked under the guise of family expenses. The receipts told a story. There were trips to exotic locations, purchases for things I knew nothing about, and unexplained charges for lavish gifts. She had been living a double life, and I had been unknowingly paying for it. Then came the property records. Eric and Trina had bought a house together 3 years ago. The house was in a quiet, upscale neighborhood, and it was clear that Trina and Eric had been planning their future together. They had used our joint savings to pay for the down payment. I had contributed to it without ever knowing what it was really for. The worst part was that they had kept this house a secret, even though I had been the one paying for it all along. I was the one putting food on the table, providing for my children, and I had no idea that my money was being used to build a future for the man who had been sleeping with my wife. When I first saw the photos of the house, something inside me snapped. I had been so trusting, so focused on making my family's life better, that I had allowed myself to be blind to the truth. I had been providing for my family, while Trina had been using that money to fund her affair. Every time I paid a bill, every time I wrote a check, I had been unknowingly paying for the house that Eric and Trina had bought together. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Trina had used our children as pawns in her game. She had convinced me that everything was fine, that the kids were happy, that our family was solid. All the while, she had been planning a future with Eric. A future where I wasn't part of the picture. The kids had no idea what was going on, but I did. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. Janet, the private investigator, had uncovered even more about Trina and Eric's secret life. She found credit card statements with charges that Trina had tried to hide, as well as evidence that they had been spending money on their affair for years. The receipts and bank records were overwhelming. Trina had been living a life of luxury, while I had been working tirelessly to provide for a family that wasn't even mine. And the worst part was that she thought she could get away with it. She thought she could fool me forever, but no more. The truth was now out in the open, and I had the evidence to prove it. It was time to take action. I had spent enough years living in the dark, trusting a woman who had been deceiving me every step of the way. Now I was going to expose her lies and fight for my children. I shared the evidence with Catherine. She was horrified by the extent of the deception, but reassured me that we had a solid case. "This is financial fraud," she said. "And with the paternity test results and everything else you've gathered, you have a strong chance of getting full custody of the kids. But you have to be prepared. Trina is going to fight back. She's going to try to make you look like the bad guy." I knew that Catherine was right. Trina wouldn't go down without a fight. She had spent years building a perfect lie, and she wouldn't let it crumble easily. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The truth was on my side. I had the evidence. I had the love for my kids, and I was going to fight for them, no matter what it took. The financial fraud charges, the paternity test results, the recordings, the documents. It was all coming together. Trina and Eric had no idea what they were up against. They thought they had the upper hand, but they had underestimated me. They had underestimated my will to fight for what was right. I wasn't just going to take what they threw at me. I was going to take back my life, my family, and my future. And I was going to make sure that Sophie and Tyler knew the truth, that they understood who had been there for them from day one. I was their father, and nothing was going to change that. The battle was just beginning, but I was ready. I had the evidence, the strength, and the resolve to fight for the life I had built with my kids. And I wasn't going to let Trina or Eric take that away from me. The more I uncovered, the worse the betrayal seemed. What Trina had done wasn't just a lapse in judgment. It was a cold, calculated manipulation of everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. The further I dug, the more I began to see that I had been living in a house of lies, a house that had been built on deceit and betrayal. But now I was uncovering every detail, each one more damning than the last. I spent long nights poring over documents with Catherine and Janet. The financial records alone were enough to make my blood boil. The amount of money Trina had diverted into her secret account, into funding trips with Eric, was staggering. Money that should have been going into our savings, our kids' education, and our future had instead been used to fund a life she had been building with him behind my back. It wasn't just the vacations or the lavish gifts. It was the years of hidden spending, the lies she had woven to cover her tracks. But the deeper I went, the more I realized that the deception wasn't just financial. It was emotional, it was personal, and it was something that had reached deep into every aspect of our lives. I had been living in a marriage where Trina had been emotionally disconnected from me for years. She had been leading a double life, pretending to be the loving wife and mother, while secretly planning a future with Eric. I kept thinking back to all the moments we had shared, our anniversary dinners, the family outings, the quiet nights at home. How many of those moments had been genuine? How many of them had been nothing more than part of her performance? How many times had she stood by me, pretending to be the perfect wife, knowing all along that she was building a life with someone else? It made everything we had built together feel like a sham. The hardest part of it all wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that my trust had been so completely shattered. Trina had spent years lying to me, lying to our children, and I had never questioned her. I had been so focused on doing the right thing, on being the best husband and father I could be, that I never once stopped to ask myself if I was being deceived. One afternoon, as I sat in my truck, scrolling through the countless text messages between Trina and Eric, a sickening thought crossed my mind. How long had this been going on? The affair, the lies, the manipulation. How long had I been living in the dark, completely unaware of the world they had been building? The messages between them were damning. They had discussed everything, how they had first met, the trips they had taken together, the future they had planned. They had been planning for years, and I had been a silent observer, never once realizing I was being played. And then, there was the conversation that cut deeper than any of the others. Trina had sent Eric a text that read, "Matthew is such an idiot. He'll never figure it out. He's too trusting." That text, those words, were the final straw. It was one thing for her to betray me behind my back, but to mock me so openly, to call me a fool, was unforgivable. I felt a mixture of rage and heartbreak. All the love I had given her, all the trust I had placed in her, had been met with nothing but contempt. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had treated me as if I were beneath her, a mere accessory to the life she had really wanted with Eric. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let her get away with it. I had to expose the truth, no matter the cost. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that this was no longer just about the affair. It was about everything she had stolen from me. The trust, the love, the family I thought I had. I was going to take back what was mine. I wasn't going to let her destroy my life, my family, and my future. Not without a fight. Janet continued to gather evidence, and with each new piece of information, my resolve grew stronger. I had to make sure that Trina would face the consequences of her actions. She had to answer for the lies, the manipulation, and the betrayal. But I also knew that I had to be strategic. I had to wait for the right moment to strike. The truth was on my side now, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I had the paternity results, the financial documents, the emails, and the recordings. I had everything I needed to show the court exactly what had been happening behind closed doors. But I couldn't afford to make any mistakes. This battle was going to be long, and it was going to be hard. But I was ready for it. I wasn't going to let Trina and Eric walk away unscathed. They had taken so much from me. But now, I was taking it all back. It wasn't just about winning. It was about justice, about making sure that the kids knew the truth, about making sure that Trina and Eric would never be able to tear apart our lives again. And I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, the only thing that remained was the love and the family I had worked so hard to build. The truth, I realized, wasn't just a weapon. It was my shield. And with every document I gathered, every photo I snapped, every record I uncovered, I felt myself gaining strength. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Trina and Eric had thought they could manipulate everything, but they had underestimated how far I was willing to go to protect my children and to expose their lies. Janet had been a godsend. Her ability to track down everything Trina had tried to hide was unmatched. She had found receipts for the trips Trina and Eric had taken, luxury hotels, private flights, and extravagant dinners, all paid for with the money that should have been supporting our family. But the financial records were only the beginning. Janet had also obtained the bank transfer logs, showing how much money had been funneled into Eric's account over the years. The audacity of it all, it was staggering. I thought about how many times I had worked overtime, stayed late to grade papers, or sacrificed time with the kids to make sure we could afford the house, the car, the things that were supposed to give us a comfortable life, and all the while, Trina had been secretly spending that money, funneling it to Eric to fund a future they had planned for themselves. Every paycheck I had earned had gone into their pockets, and I had been blissfully unaware. But the financial fraud wasn't the only weapon I had. I also had the paternity test results, and they were undeniable. Trina had spent years convincing me that the kids were mine, but the cold, hard facts told a different story. Sophie and Tyler were not my biological children. I didn't care. I never had. The love I had for them, the bond we shared, was more important than any test result. I had been their father in every sense of the word, but now I was going to use the paternity tests as part of my strategy. It wasn't about biology. It was about the truth. And the truth was that I had been their father from the moment they were born, and nothing could change that. The recordings Janet had made were another key part of the case. The conversation between Trina and Eric, discussing how they would tell the kids about their real father, was a devastating piece of evidence. Hearing them talk about me as if I were nothing more than an inconvenience, something to be swept away when it was time, was gut-wrenching. I had been the one there for them, the one who had taken care of their every need. Yet Trina and Eric had been living their secret life, planning to upend everything. I knew the recording would be crucial in court. When I met with Catherine again to review everything, she was impressed. "You've built a solid case here," she said. "This is one of the most clear-cut cases of fraud I've ever seen. The financial evidence is overwhelming, and the paternity test, along with the recordings, gives us a strong argument for custody. But we need to be prepared for what's coming. Trina will fight back hard. She's not going to go down without a fight." "I'm ready," I said, feeling a resolve in my gut that I hadn't known was there before. "I'm not just fighting for custody. I'm fighting for the truth. I'm fighting for my kids. I'm fighting to show them who their real father is, who's been there for them, who's loved them unconditionally. I'm fighting to make sure they grow up knowing the truth, no matter what Trina and Eric think they can do." Catherine nodded. "Good. We have the evidence we need. We'll file for full custody, and we'll present this to the court. But remember, this isn't going to be easy. Trina is going to try to paint you as the bad guy. She'll do everything she can to make you look unstable or unfit. We need to be prepared for every angle." I knew she was right. Trina would fight dirty. She would try to manipulate the situation, twist the truth, and play the victim. But I wasn't going to let her. I had worked too hard to build a life with Sophie and Tyler, and I wasn't going to let her tear it all apart. The next few days were a blur of activity. I met with Catherine and Janet regularly, finalizing the details of our case. We gathered more evidence, more affidavits, more testimonies from friends and family who could vouch for my role as a father. I documented everything, keeping careful track of every step I took, every move I made. I couldn't afford to slip up now. The plan was set in motion. We would file for divorce, submit the custody petition, and present the evidence in court. I would fight for my kids, for the future we deserved, and for the truth to come out. As the day to file approached, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I had spent so many years trusting Trina, believing in her, and now I was about to expose everything she had done. It wasn't just about ending a marriage. It was about taking back control of my life and my future. It was about giving Sophie and Tyler the life they deserved. The hardest part wasn't going to be the battle in court. It was going to be seeing the look on their faces when they found out the truth. The truth about their mother, the truth about the life they had been living. But I would make sure they understood. I would make sure they knew that I had always been there for them, and that I would always be there for them, no matter what. And so, with the evidence in hand, and the determination to see it through, I prepared for the next step. The battle was far from over, but I was ready. Trina and Eric thought they had won. They thought they could get away with it all. But they had made one mistake. They had underestimated me. The days leading up to filing the divorce papers were tense, filled with a quiet anticipation. Every morning, I woke up to the same routine: get the kids ready for school, make breakfast, and pretend everything was normal. Trina, ever oblivious, continued with her usual charming demeanor, as if the world hadn't been completely upended for me. But beneath the surface, I was moving forward with purpose. Catherine and I finalized our approach. We had everything in place: the paternity results, the financial fraud evidence, the recordings and affidavits from witnesses who could speak to my role as the children's primary caregiver. It was a solid case, a clear-cut picture of betrayal and deception. Trina and Eric's carefully constructed world was about to fall apart. The plan was simple: First, we would file for divorce. Second, I would request emergency custody of Sophie and Tyler, based on the evidence of their mother's deception and the potential harm it had caused to their emotional and financial well-being. And third, we would present all the evidence we had, each detail meticulously documented and prepared to ensure that there was no way for Trina to deny the truth. I felt a surge of power as I reviewed everything one last time. I had been the fool for far too long. I had let Trina manipulate me, let her control the narrative of our lives, but no more. The truth was now in my hands, and I was ready to take it to the court. The hardest part was the waiting. Every day, I felt the weight of the impending confrontation. What would happen when Trina found out? How would she react when she saw the papers, when she realized that her world was about to crumble? I couldn't imagine what she would do. Would she fight back with lies, try to twist the truth, or would she finally break down, facing the consequences of her actions? I wasn't prepared for the emotional toll this was taking. The betrayal, the lies, it had all been too much. But in the midst of it, I reminded myself of one thing. I was doing this for Sophie and Tyler. They deserved the truth. They deserved to know who their real father was. They deserved a chance at a future where they weren't caught in the web of their mother's lies. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. There was no turning back now. My plan was in motion, and soon I would expose everything Trina and Eric had worked so hard to keep hidden. The time had come to let the truth unfold, and I was going to make sure it did. I wasn't going to let them take my kids. I wasn't going to let them rewrite our story. I had spent 12 years raising Sophie and Tyler, loving them, protecting them, guiding them through life. I wasn't going to let a woman I thought I knew tear that away from me. The morning arrived. It was the day I would file for divorce. It was the day I would take control of my life, my family, and my future. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Trina would never see it coming. She would never understand how far I had gone, how much I had prepared. I filed the papers. The process was smooth, almost eerily so. It felt like the world around me had slowed down, and everything I had worked for, the years of being the best husband I could be, the father I thought I was, the man I had tried to be for the family, suddenly felt like it had led to this moment. Everything in my life had been building toward this confrontation. After filing, I immediately went to the next step, the custody petition. It was time. My case was ready, and I had every piece of evidence to back up my claims. I wasn't going to let Trina manipulate the kids into thinking she was the one who had always been there for them. I was the one who had been there for every scraped knee, every soccer game, every school play. I was the one who had been there when they needed someone to talk to, when they needed comfort, when they needed a father. I had given them everything, and now I was going to fight to make sure they had everything they deserved. The hardest part wasn't the legal battle that was about to unfold. It was going to be watching Sophie and Tyler's world shatter. I knew they would be hurt, confused, angry. I knew they would have questions that I didn't have all the answers to. But I also knew that the truth was the best thing I could give them. They had to know what their mother had done. They had to understand the depths of the lies she had woven. They had to know that I was their father, and nothing could change that. I made sure everything was in place. The affidavits, the witness statements, the evidence from the private investigator, the paternity results. Everything was ready to go. I was ready to fight for them. I was ready to fight for our future. But as I sat in my truck, the weight of what was to come hit me all over again. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for my children, for their future, for their understanding of who they were and who had always been there for them. I wasn't about to let Trina's lies define their lives. I wasn't going to let them grow up believing that everything they knew about their family was true. The time had come. The first move had been made. The plan was in motion, and I was going to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. After filing the papers, the weight of everything hit me all at once. It wasn't relief or excitement. It was a deep, gnawing sense of unease. I had been planning this moment for weeks, obsessing over the details, preparing for the fallout. But now that the ball was rolling, I felt the quiet tension that comes before a storm. The kids had no idea what was coming. They still went about their days, oblivious to the turmoil that was about to rock their world. Sophie was excited about her upcoming science fair project. Tyler was getting ready for his next baseball game, and I was still playing my part: dad, coach, husband. But inside, I was no longer the man I had been just a few short days ago. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I spent the next few days in a blur, barely able to focus on anything other than the looming confrontation. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining how Trina would react when she found out. Would she try to manipulate the situation, make me out to be the bad guy? Would she break down and plead for mercy? I had no idea, but I was certain of one thing. She would fight with everything she had, and I wasn't prepared to lose. During those days, I found myself questioning everything again. What would life look like after all of this? What would the future hold for Sophie and Tyler? Would they hate me for exposing their mother's lies, or would they understand why I had to do it? It was impossible to know, but I knew one thing. I had to protect them. They had to know the truth, no matter how painful it would be. The calm before the storm was suffocating. Trina went about her day, completely unaware that her world was about to collapse. She still smiled at me, still gave me those brief, casual touches that I had once taken for granted. But now, every glance, every word, felt like a mask. I could see the cracks in the facade, the way she looked at me with that little bit of guilt hidden behind her eyes, the way she would sometimes flinch when I asked questions that seemed too probing. But she had no idea how much I knew. I wondered if she could sense it, the shift in the air. Could she feel the walls closing in on her? Could she tell that I was no longer the naive fool she had once manipulated so easily? I didn't know, but I could see in her eyes that she was starting to realize something wasn't right. I didn't know how much time I had before she figured it out, but I knew it wouldn't be long. She'd been a step ahead for so long, but now the tables had turned. It was strange, pretending everything was fine. I had never been good at hiding my feelings, but somehow I was managing to pull it off. The routine was the same: family dinners, bedtime stories, soccer games. But all the while, I was preparing for the day that would change everything. In the evenings, after the kids were asleep, I would retreat to my study, reviewing the evidence once more, running through every detail in my head. I needed to make sure everything was perfect. This wasn't just a fight for custody. It was a fight for the life I had built with Sophie and Tyler. I wasn't going to let Trina's lies define their future. I was going to protect them, no matter what it took. And yet, as the days passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. What if Trina fought back harder than I expected? What if the truth wasn't enough to win in court? What if the lies she had built over the years were so strong that the system wouldn't see through them? It was a terrifying thought, but I had no choice but to push forward. The calm before the storm was deceptive. It made it feel like nothing had changed, like the world was still spinning on its axis. But I knew better. I knew that everything was about to shift, and I had no idea where it would leave me or my family. I spent hours at night, preparing for the inevitable battle, imagining every possible scenario, running through every piece of evidence I had gathered. It wasn't just about the financial fraud or the paternity test results. It was about something bigger. It was about showing the court what kind of father I had been, what kind of man I was, and most importantly, showing them that I was the one who had always been there for Sophie and Tyler. And then, just as the calm began to feel unbearable, the phone call came. It was time. Trina had been served. I stared at my phone for a moment, the weight of it sinking in. There was no turning back now. The battle was no longer just an idea. It was real. Trina would find out the truth, and our lives would change forever. I knew that the storm was coming, and I had no choice but to face it head-on. The day Trina was served was like the calm after a thunderstorm, where the silence is suffocating, heavy with what's yet to come. When I handed her the papers, her face went white. She didn't say a word. For the first time in years, there was a vulnerability in her expression that I had never seen. The woman who had spent over a decade manipulating me, hiding her secrets, now seemed completely exposed. I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, unsettling sadness. "You didn't have to do this, Matthew," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I thought we were past this. You really think this is the best thing for the kids?" I didn't answer immediately. I just stood there, watching her. I could feel my heart racing, my mind spinning, but I was calm. Too calm. My stomach twisted, and I wanted to scream, to lash out at her for everything she'd done. But I didn't. I stayed silent, because I knew that nothing I could say would change the reality she had created. "I did this because they deserve better," I replied. "They deserve the truth, and they deserve a future where they're not living in the shadow of your lies." Her face twisted in something between anger and disbelief. "You're making a huge mistake. You think they'll forgive you? You think they'll choose you over me?" Her eyes flashed, and for a moment I could see the woman I had loved all those years ago. But she was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The mask had finally slipped, and all I could see was the cold, calculated person she had become. "You've already made that mistake," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You chose him, Trina. You chose him over our family, and I'm choosing to protect them now." She flinched at my words. "You don't know what you're doing," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "This will destroy us. It'll destroy the kids. They'll hate you for this." "I'm not doing this to destroy anyone," I said. "But I will fight for them. I will make sure they know the truth. They need to see who their real father is. Not just the man who was there to provide, but the one who truly loved them, who cared about them every single day. Her lips trembled, and for a moment I thought she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she pushed past me, headed for the door. "You're making a huge mistake," she muttered again as she left, her footsteps heavy and purposeful. As I stood there in the house that had once felt like home, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. The battle was no longer an idea or a plan. It was real. The decision had been made, and there was no going back. I went to the kids' rooms after she left, just like I had done countless nights before. Sophie was asleep, curled up with her favorite book beside her, and Tyler was sprawled across his bed, his baseball mitt resting on the floor. I couldn't help but watch them for a moment, my heart aching with both love and guilt. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to have their world shattered. But I had to believe that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only way forward. The lies Trina had built around them would never allow them to live freely, to grow without doubt or confusion. It wasn't just about me and her. It was about them and their future. The next few days were a blur of legal documents, tense meetings with Catherine, and preparing myself for the inevitable fallout. I knew Trina would fight, but I was ready. I had the evidence. I had the truth, and I wasn't about to back down. I spent the following weekend preparing my case. Catherine had already started filing the papers, and Janet was continuing her work to ensure every piece of evidence was in place. But I knew that the real battle was about to begin. I had no idea how Trina would react, how far she was willing to go to keep her secrets safe. But I knew one thing. She would stop at nothing. I didn't know how the kids would react to the truth. How could I prepare them for something like this? How could I make them understand that their whole world was about to change? It would hurt them. It would confuse them. But at least they would know the truth. At least they wouldn't grow up believing in a lie. Trina came back a few hours later, her expression hard and cold. She had obviously spent the time gathering her thoughts, trying to find a way to turn this around. She wasn't going to make this easy. "I've already talked to my lawyer," she said sharply, her eyes narrowing. "I'm not backing down. You'll regret this." "You've already made your choice," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I'm just following through on mine." "You're going to lose, Matthew," she snapped, her voice shaking with anger. "You'll lose the kids, and you'll lose everything. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're not. You're just a man who ruined everything." "I'm not ruining anything," I said. "I'm protecting them, and I'll make sure they understand that, even if you won't." The next few days were a blur of phone calls, meetings with lawyers, and strategizing for what was to come. But no matter how much I prepared, I couldn't shake the guilt. This wasn't how I wanted things to end. I never imagined that I would be fighting my wife for custody of our children. This wasn't the life I had envisioned, but it was the life that had been forced upon me. And yet, despite the uncertainty, I felt a strange sense of resolve. The storm was coming. The battle was about to begin. And no matter how much it hurt, I knew I had to see it through. For the kids, for the truth, and for the future I would build with them, no matter how hard the journey would be. The day Trina was served marked the beginning of an emotional roller coaster that neither of us could have predicted. The moment the legal papers were in her hands, everything changed. Trina went from being the woman I had loved and trusted to a stranger, a woman whose actions I could no longer understand. The shock and anger in her eyes when she first saw the papers will be something I'll never forget. But what came next was even harder to process. It wasn't just the words she said or the anger she expressed. It was the subtle manipulation that followed. Trina was smart, and she knew how to play the game. She began making threats, trying to paint me as the villain in front of the kids. I couldn't let her do it. I wouldn't let her turn the truth into something it wasn't. "I'll make sure you never see them again," she told me coldly as we stood in the hallway after the papers had been served. "You're ruining their lives. Do you think they'll forgive you for this? For tearing apart their family?" Her words were like daggers, each one carefully calculated to wound me, to make me second-guess myself. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Not now. In the days that followed, I watched as Trina began to spin her web of lies, trying to make me the bad guy in the eyes of the kids. She would tell them that I was doing this to hurt her, that I was the one who was tearing our family apart. She tried to convince them that I was making a mistake, that I didn't love them anymore. It was painful to hear her say these things, especially knowing that the kids were already confused and scared. They didn't understand what was happening, and I knew it would only get worse before it got better. But I couldn't let her do it. I couldn't let her use them as pawns in her game. So I kept my distance, doing my best to protect them from the fallout. I spent time with Sophie and Tyler, comforting them when they asked questions, reassuring them that I loved them and that nothing would ever change that. I told them that no matter what happened, I would always be their dad, and nothing could take that away. Trina, however, continued her campaign of manipulation. She would call me, leaving voicemails filled with threats and accusations, each one more venomous than the last. She told me I would lose the kids, that she would fight for them with everything she had. She told me that I was making a mistake, that I had no idea what I was getting myself into. She was wrong. The hardest part of all of this was not just the lies Trina was telling, but the fact that I knew the kids could hear those lies. Sophie and Tyler had grown up thinking everything was fine. They had no idea that their world was built on a lie. They had no idea that the woman they called their mother had been living a double life for years. It was devastating to think about how this would affect them, how it would shape their view of the world. But I couldn't back down. I couldn't let Trina continue to manipulate them. I couldn't let her tear apart the bond I had worked so hard to build with them. I had to fight. For them. For their future. And for the truth. As the legal proceedings continued, I found myself drowning in paperwork. The custody battle wasn't going to be easy. Catherine, my lawyer, told me it would take months before a final decision was made. I had to be patient. I had to be strong. But as each day passed, I felt the weight of it all pressing down on me. I was no longer just a husband fighting for his family. I was a father fighting for his kids' future. One night, after another long day of meetings and paperwork, I found myself sitting in my truck outside the house that had once been a home, the house that had once been filled with laughter, with love. Now it felt hollow. The walls seemed to close in on me, the silence deafening. I thought about the years I had spent with Trina, the years I had spent raising Sophie and Tyler, believing that we were a family. It felt like everything was slipping away, piece by piece. But then I thought about the kids. I thought about their smiles, their laughter, the way they looked up to me. I thought about the bond we had shared, the love we had built. And I knew, deep down, that no matter what happened, I would never give up on them. I would never let Trina take them away from me. Not without a fight. The next day, I sat down with Sophie and Tyler. They were both quiet, their eyes filled with questions I knew I couldn't answer right away. Sophie, who had always been perceptive, was the first to speak. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. "Why are you and Mom fighting? Why is everything so different?" I looked at her, my heart breaking. She didn't deserve this. Neither of them did. But I had to be honest with them, even if the truth was painful. "Things have changed, Sophie," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "But no matter what happens, I want you to know one thing. I love you, and I will always be here for you. Nothing will ever change that." Tyler nodded, though his eyes seemed far away. He was still processing everything. "I know this is hard," I continued, "but I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to make sure you both know the truth, and I'll always be your dad, no matter what happens." They didn't respond right away. They just sat there, taking it in. I could see the confusion in their eyes, but I also saw something else: hope. They needed to believe that things would be okay, that their world wasn't going to fall apart, and I would do everything in my power to make sure it didn't. As I watched them that day, I realized something important. This wasn't just about winning a legal battle. It wasn't just about fighting for custody. It was about showing them that no matter how dark the world seemed, no matter how many lies were told, the truth always had the power to heal. I would fight for that truth. I would fight for them. And no matter what happened, I would never stop. The days after that conversation were a blur of meetings, legal documents, and sleepless nights. Every conversation with Catherine, every call with Janet, every interaction with Trina felt like a battle. I couldn't afford to slip up now. The pressure was mounting. Trina's reaction had been intense, but she was just beginning to ramp up her efforts. She'd always been a fighter, and now I saw how far she was willing to go to protect her carefully constructed world. The manipulation didn't stop. I wasn't just fighting for custody anymore. I was fighting for the truth. Sophie and Tyler were still processing what was happening, but I could see their unease. They still didn't understand fully why things were so different, but they could feel it. They could feel the tension, the distance between Trina and me growing wider every day. I had to make sure they understood. Not everything needed to be explained right away, but I couldn't let them be caught in the crossfire. They needed to know that they were loved, that this wasn't their fault. It was hard, seeing them struggling to make sense of it all, but I had no choice. They needed to know the truth, even if it shattered everything they'd once believed. Trina, on the other hand, seemed to be doubling down on her tactics. She didn't take the legal papers sitting down. She fought back with everything she had. Calls from her lawyer were constant, demands for mediation, threats to take this to the courts immediately. She had no intention of making this easy, and she started playing dirty. I expected her to try to paint me as the villain, but what I didn't expect was the subtle way she tried to manipulate the children. She started planting seeds of doubt, telling them that I was being unreasonable, that I was breaking the family apart. Sophie came to me one afternoon, her brow furrowed in that way she did when something was weighing on her mind. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "Mom says you're doing this because you want to hurt her, that you're trying to take me and Tyler away from her because you're mad." I could feel my heart break in my chest. This was exactly what I had feared. The kids being caught in the middle, confused and hurt by their mother's manipulation. But I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. "Sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her level. "This isn't about hurting anyone. It's about doing what's right for you and Tyler. It's about the truth. You and Tyler deserve to know the truth, no matter how hard it is to hear." "But Mom said," Sophie began, her voice wavering. "I know what your mom said," I interrupted gently. "But sometimes people say things when they're scared or hurt. What I want you to know is that I love you. I always have. And nothing will ever change that." Tyler, who had been silently watching from the doorway, spoke up. "Are you and Mom gonna get divorced?" His voice was soft, as if the very question itself was too heavy to say out loud. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around us. "Yes, buddy, we are. But you and Sophie are my first priority. Always." Sophie, still visibly upset, clung to me tightly. I held her close, my heart aching for the pain they were both going through. I had always wanted to protect them from this, from the mess I was now in. But the truth couldn't stay hidden anymore. "I'm not going anywhere, kiddo. I'll always be here for you, no matter what happens," I promised, trying to reassure them both, even though I was uncertain of everything around me. Trina, despite the distance she tried to create, wasn't fully backing off either. There were moments when she would try to guilt-trip me in front of the kids, saying things like, "This is all so unfair to them," or, "You're tearing this family apart, Matthew." But no matter what she said, no matter how many times she tried to undermine me, I remained firm. I would not let her distort the truth anymore. It became clear to me that the worst part of this whole battle wasn't the legal fight itself. It was seeing how Trina's actions affected the kids. Watching them struggle to comprehend the unraveling of their world broke me in ways I didn't expect. I would never wish this kind of pain on anyone, especially them. But I couldn't allow Trina to continue dragging them into her lies. The court dates came faster than expected. I had prepared myself as best as I could. The evidence was strong, and with Catherine by my side, I felt confident that I had a solid case. But no matter how much I prepared, no matter how strong the evidence was, I knew this wouldn't be easy. The emotional toll was already taking its toll on me. I could feel myself growing weary. But I reminded myself of why I was doing this. The first hearing was filled with tension. Trina's lawyer was ruthless, trying to paint me as an unfit father, accusing me of being vengeful and unstable. But I had my evidence. I had my case. And I had my resolve. I kept my cool, answering questions calmly, presenting everything as it was, truthfully, meticulously, without hesitation. Trina sat on the other side of the courtroom, her expression cold. I could see the anger in her eyes, the desperation. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. She had lost her power over me, and I wasn't going to let her win this. But I couldn't help but notice Sophie and Tyler in the back of the room. They were there, sitting quietly, watching everything unfold. I knew it was hard for them to be there, to see their parents at odds. But I also knew that they needed to see the truth, even if it was painful. They needed to know that their future wasn't going to be built on lies anymore. As the hearing ended, I couldn't help but think about what was next. The battle wasn't over, but one thing was clear. I would do whatever it took to make sure Sophie and Tyler knew they were loved, no matter how much this process would test us. The truth had already started to heal the cracks in our family, and no matter how long it took, we would come out stronger on the other side. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of court hearings, mediation sessions, and emotional turmoil. Every day felt like a battle, but the more I fought, the more I realized that I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting for my kids' future. The truth had already done its job. It had exposed the cracks in Trina's carefully constructed life, and now it was time for me to pick up the pieces. The court process was draining, both physically and emotionally. Every time I thought we were getting closer to a resolution, another obstacle would arise. Trina's lawyer did everything in their power to twist the narrative, to make me look like the villain. But I had my evidence. Solid, irrefutable evidence that painted a clear picture of what had been happening behind closed doors for years. I spent hours going over everything: financial records, the paternity test results, recordings, and the witness statements. I made sure everything was in order, leaving nothing to chance. I couldn't afford to slip up. The stakes were too high, and my kids deserved more than to be caught in the middle of our mess. During the process, I had moments where I questioned myself. Was I doing the right thing? Was I making the right decisions? Every time I felt that doubt creep in, I would look at Sophie and Tyler. Their faces, still so full of confusion and sadness, reminded me why I had to keep going. I had promised them that nothing would change, that I would always be their dad, and I was going to keep that promise, no matter what it took. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of the final court hearing arrived. It was the moment that would decide everything. I walked into the courtroom with Catherine, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on me. But despite the nerves, there was a part of me that felt something else: determination. I had fought too hard to back down now. Trina arrived shortly after I did, her face still a mask of defiance and anger. I could see that she was holding it together, but I knew that she was scared. She knew deep down that the truth was on my side, but she wasn't going to give up without a fight. She sat across from me, eyes locked with mine, trying to intimidate me, to make me second-guess myself. But I wasn't going to let her. I had spent too long in the shadows, too long playing her game. Now it was my turn to take control. The hearing started, and both sides presented their cases. Trina's lawyer tried to paint me as an unfit father, trying to spin every detail of our marriage and the kids' upbringing to fit their narrative. They brought up everything they could: my financial situation, my past mistakes, the fact that I was angry and hurt. But no matter how hard they tried, it didn't matter. The truth was clear. Then it was my turn. I stood before the judge, feeling the weight of the room pressing down on me. But I held my ground. I explained everything: how I had been there for Sophie and Tyler, how I had been the one to raise them, love them, and support them through everything. I spoke about the love I had for them, the bond that couldn't be broken, no matter what. I showed the evidence: the paternity test results, the financial records, the recordings. Every piece of information painted a picture of a father who had been deceived. A father who had been manipulated by the person he trusted most. When I finished speaking, I sat back down, my heart racing. There was nothing more I could do. The evidence was in the judge's hands now. I could only wait. The room was silent as the judge deliberated. It felt like an eternity before he spoke, but when he did, his words were clear. He granted me full custody of Sophie and Tyler. Trina was granted supervised visitation, but she wouldn't be able to manipulate them, to twist the truth in her favor anymore. The judge's decision was a victory not just for me, but for the kids. They would finally have a stable, honest future. The relief I felt in that moment was overwhelming. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I wasn't just relieved because I had won. I was relieved because I knew that Sophie and Tyler would be okay. They would be raised in a home where truth and love were the foundation, not lies and manipulation. After the hearing, I went to Sophie and Tyler. They were waiting for me outside the courtroom, their faces full of questions. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't fully understand everything that had happened, but they knew enough to know that their world had changed. I knelt down to their level, feeling the weight of everything that had happened over the past months. "You guys are going to be okay," I said, my voice steady. "Nothing's going to change. I'm still your dad. I will always be here for you, no matter what." Sophie hugged me tightly, her arms wrapped around me like she was holding on to the only thing that felt real. Tyler stood there for a moment, his eyes wide. Then he stepped forward and hugged me too. I held them both, feeling a surge of love and protection that I had never felt before. This was it. This was what I had been fighting for. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, adjustments, and more emotional hurdles to face. But in that moment, as I held my kids, I knew that everything we had been through, the pain, the betrayal, the struggle, was worth it. Because I had them. And we would rebuild, stronger than before. As we walked out of the courthouse together, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. This wasn't the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where love and truth would be our foundation. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful for the future. The truth had set us free. And now, together, we would start anew.